Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast. In this podcast, we explore how nature, science, education, and culture can benefit all children and future generations. This is a show for educators, parents, mentors, and anyone interested in making the lives of our children, families, and communities better. So sit back, take a breath, and enjoy the show. And now for your host, Asher Cloran.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Life Rocks podcast. I'm your host, Asher, and I'm here today with Tanya Carroll. Tanya Carroll has been a passionate fitness trainer and coach for over 17 years. She's trained with the Czech Institute, been a Checkie and an integrated movement specialist, holistic lifestyle coach. She's a mother to 6 children, now a grandmother. Tanya is passionate about working with the body and takes a full system approach to dealing with any issues that a patient might have. She has amazing knowledge and awareness and skills when it comes to restoring healthy human movement. Basically, I'm excited to have Tanya on here to figure out what it's like to be a mother, as well as a holistic coach and a physical therapist in this modern world. So without further ado, welcome Tanya to the show.
Thanks, Asha. Thanks for having me. Jeepers, that sounds like a very complex intro.
Well, I guess that's the way I see it. You know, you've had an amazing career in the fitness industry and simultaneously having a big family of 6 children and now with grandchildren.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fascinating thing and something that probably everyone wants to hear a little bit more about. I'm interested. You've had this interest in sports for a long time, right back to childhood. How did you get into sports? Was it your parents that were encouraging or you just picked it up?
Really good question. And when, thinking about that, I actually don't tell this story very often, I don't think, even in my own podcast, but I hated sport as a child. Like, I didn't like doing it. I was actually born with congenital hip dysplasia, which means that both of my hips were completely subluxated, completely dislocated out of the joint, and it wasn't picked up until I was 3 months old, I think it was, which in those days was quite late. So I was in a harness from the time I was 3 months till I was 9 months old. And when I came out of that harness, I did barely any infant development, and just basically Mum said one day, 3 weeks after I came out of the harness, I went to a birthday party with one of my aunties and her children, my cousins, and came home from the birthday party walking. So I hadn't crawled, hadn't rolled, hadn't done any of my infant development in that harness because it was really restrictive. But yeah, just started walking on my, because all the other kids were walking. So I missed a lot of those patterns. So as a kid, I had a funny gait pattern, and I used to get teased from the time I was in school. So from the time I was in kindergarten. And I think that does actually come a lot from even before that, because my mum and dad, particularly my mum, was really protective of me. And I didn't find this out probably until really recently, but when I was diagnosed with hip dysplasia, Mum thought it was her fault. So she'd go out into public and people would say, "Oh my God, the poor child, what have you done to the child?" kind of thing. And she was really embarrassed about it and took that on herself. And I think as a kid that came through her protection of me. So I wasn't involved. And these days it's different as well with sports and activities that kids have. So I didn't do any of that before school, but when I went to school, it was very obvious that my gait pattern was different and I ran very differently as well. And of course you have to do that sort of thing and you want to do that as a kid. So I remember being teased about it. So I never loved sport until probably in my late teens. So and we're going to talk about this, I know you're going to ask me about this, but roller skating. So I roller skated, that was my sport. So from when I was 3 years old was when I first put on my first pair of roller skates, and I could roller skate and I felt like I could be free on roller skates. So That was my thing. And as a teenager, I played sport. I played netball, I played basketball, but again, I enjoyed them, but I knew I wasn't good at them. So it was kind of like I held myself back. And that gait pattern was something that continued with me throughout my whole life. So my family was very sporty and we were encouraged to play sports. Like my brother played rugby league for the Canberra Raiders, but it was kind of like he was good at that. So that was his,
Right.
like he was good at it. So my sister and I we played, but we weren't very good. And it was really just so that we kept active, that we were encouraged to play, I guess.
Okay, so you did have the sporty family, but you had this personal physical challenge early on. And then now you're in the realm of physical development and working with those stages of infant development. So
yep.
For our audience who's hearing this term infant development, I guess what we're talking about in this instance is the physical stages that an infant goes through as it's becoming a growing being. And there's these certain stages along the way that help develop our spinal curvature, our abdominal musculature, and the set and placement of our bones in our body. Can you just give your own definition for infant development? And
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's evolved as well. So within the CHECK program, we learnt that in, I think it was IMS level 3 or 2, and we did a bit in HLC, holistic lifestyle coaching as well. Actually, I think that's where we did the breathing patterns. But infant development, my understanding of it is now, it happens pre-birth. So it happens in utero. And it's the development of a human in a way that is most functional to survive in a world with gravity, basically, and how we've changed and evolved in that, because infant development has changed, because we were never, when we first evolved on the earth, we weren't bipedal. So bipedal means that we're up on 2 feet. We were quadrupeds. So we were always on 4 limbs. So our hands, our feet, and our knees. And then we evolved as our brain grew to be bipedal. And debatably, that has been to the benefit or to the detriment of human health. And some would say that it's probably been to the detriment of it in some ways. But yeah, so infant development is the process we go through to evolve to a standing bipedal human and being able to work against that gravity and maintain some level of good spinal alignment so that we can move through that gravity in space.
Amazing. That's a really good definition. And I like that evolutionary perspective on the pathways, trading maybe one path for another so we can get our big heads off the ground a little bit closer.
Yeah, because our brain, so our brain grew so big that in intelligence-wise, we wanted to look beyond that level of a quadruped. We wanted to look at above the mountains and see what was up there. So we had to change and adapt for that in our bodies. Yeah.
And so we could look at our iPads better once the iPads come along.
I would say that's devolving, Asha. I would definitely say that's devolving.
Well, it is, isn't it? And so, with this awareness that you've got of the evolutionary stages and the physical stages that a being has to go through to develop a healthy capacity to withstand the forces of gravity and have a life as a creature that's walking around on 2 legs that's feeling good. What are the major roadblocks you see towards attaining that infant development? And if in this little story you could include how now you see something like that hip displacement that you had so early on, how would something like that develop in utero, or how does it happen? And
Sure. Again, this is an area that I am still studying and researching all of the time. And I'm on a couple of Facebook pages that get me right into the midst of what parents are doing and what they're being told by specialists. So I'm coming from, again, the parenting aspect, which is a really important aspect to understand and be empathetic with, because I'm coaching some of these babies. They come to me because their infant pattern or their parents recognize that their infant development patterns are not quite right, when the physical therapists and the doctors sometimes say, oh, they'll be right, they'll learn it. And then they don't, and they have these problems. So they come to me. But hip dysplasia is a really interesting thing, because the treatment of it has not changed in, I would say, 20, 25 years, maybe even up to 30 years. So for me, it wasn't considered bad enough for me to be put in a plaster cast, which they call a spica, or spica, S-P-I-C-A, which is where they will put a baby or a child or an infant, and sometimes up into teenage years as well, what happens is basically anatomically, when a baby is born, we know that it takes 2 years for their bones to kind of grow into where they should be.
Yeah.
So with the acetabulum of the hip and the head of the femur, that acetabulum or the hip socket or the pelvic socket, I guess is an easier way to understand it, isn't actually rounded. It's not completely encompassing like we see it as in an adult.
Yeah.
So with a child in utero who is breech, and I was breech, and there's different types of breech, but I was what's called frank breech, which means that my legs were completely wrapped up around my head. And that was from the majority of the third trimester of my mum's pregnancy. So it was, even though they didn't have scans and things in those days, so we're talking 48 years ago now, you could still feel where the baby is positioned and knew that you were going to have a breech child. So my mum, I think mum went into labour with me. She actually went into preterm labour a week before, because as the story goes, my dad said it was on the Bathurst weekend and he was dirty because he had to take mum to hospital and he missed out on watching some of Bathurst because it was a false alarm. Right. And I wasn't born until the following week. But I was frank breech. So when, so some children are born, and parents know now from scans that they're going to be frank breech. So they're very aware, or specialists and pediatricians are very aware that that is a common cause of having hip dysplasia. Other times it's not picked up and it's just that the bones don't grow the way they should as an infant. So it might be 6 months, 12 months down the track when a child suddenly, or the parents say the hip is clicking, I'm not comfortable, there's something wrong with the hip. And that's when they're sent to specialists and they discover it then. But why it happens in utero, it's still yes, in frank breech children, it's more common.
Yeah.
But then why it evolves and why it's one of the things that I do consider as a hereditary thing, because you can see the patterns and lines down family lines with this. Why that has happened, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether we didn't evolve quite well enough through our family line from being quadrupeds into bipedal. Maybe that would have been it, because in a quadruped, we don't, your hip will sit differently in that acetabulum. So maybe I would have been better as a quadruped rather than a bipedal human through that line of my heritage, because, before me, I'm not sure who along that heritage line or that ancestry line was diagnosed or not. I don't know. I was the first one as far as we know. But then after me, one of my cousins, so my cousin who's 5 years younger than me, he was born with hip dysplasia, and then it skipped and it went down through, not my children, but one of my sister's children, were her youngest, had it as well. So, not quite sure exactly the reasons why. We still don't know, but I would love, love, love to have more research around what happens if we don't actually harness or brace children with hip dysplasia, because, from what I see and hear, I think I'd like to explore more movement-based solutions rather than just putting them in a brace and hoping that the bones grow kind of thing, because I'm in two minds about, how effective bracing and especially casting children is.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts there, because there's a whole bunch of topics that parents might deal with their child in thinking about biomechanics. And I guess the mainstream or conventional mode of treatment is often way off the mark in terms of being able to repair, regenerate, restore function. It's more just getting them okay or getting them out of pain or...
Yeah. And another thing with that is too that when a child misses certain patterns in infant development, we know that like rolling particularly and crawling and pulling movements, they don't just encourage the physical body to grow and develop. They also encourage lymphatic drainage system, as well as the fascial banding across the body. So in front of the chest here and down on the front of the pelvis, those 4 spots are really important markers for fascial banding. And I've seen people like adults who I get down on the floor who I've picked up that have got a deficit in one of their infant development patterns. And one of the first thing I take them back down to is breathing. Then I take them into the rolling patterns. And I see them start to learn how to roll. And then that opens up, and you know this as well probably, it opens up the chakra systems, but it also like brings out emotions sometimes that they didn't know they were holding on to because of those spots that they're rolling on. And children who miss those patterns, I often wonder, well, and I know because I can see it in their development, especially children who are a little bit older, but how is that affecting their emotional health as well as their physical health?
I'd say massively. And, I love the check system because they're thinking about this so holistically. Every part of the spine is, connected to every part of the chakra body or the energy body, which science is still catching up on to, fully make, certain for the mainstream. But it is all connected, and I've experienced that firsthand. So when I first learned a little bit of infant development, and it was Donald Carr was running me through inchworm, which you've now got on my program as well, which is, for the listeners, is like a spinal type wave that an infant's going to do in the crib before it has proper control of its limbs. I had this overwhelming wave of emotions hit me. It was non-distinct. It wasn't like sadness or grief or something, but it was a mixture of things, and it was deep and heavy. It was like overwhelming. And that was that kind of activation of dormant body, brain, emotions, connections that hadn't been properly facilitated in me through my growing up process. So what can you do a basic run through of infant development from birth to standing, and
Sure.
point out a few of the roadblocks that can happen for children that might be environmental, might be whatever?
Yep, sure. So first and most important thing is always breathing. So I want to see an infant from birth be able to breathe and expand through their belly, then their chest, in a prone position. So face down on a mat. I want to be able to see that expansion laterally as well as posteriorly and anteriorly. So prone means lying face down on the floor. So I want to see their back and their spine moving, and that breath should go through their body in a wave. And when you were just talking about inchworm, we use that as well for pumping. So when we talk about the breath, we talk about, yes, getting oxygen through the body and getting oxygen to the blood and that sort of thing, and all the other great benefits that breathing has for our body. But it also, we're looking at pumping. So we're looking at pumping spinal fluid through the cerebral column around the spine. So the inchworm is pumping that fluid right down to the base of the spine, or what we call the tail, because we're born with those 6 limbs rather than what people think is 4. So we've got 2 arms, 2 legs, a head and a tail. So that inchworm is very specific for including those, because we do lose these infant development patterns. Some of them, when I say lose them, they get stored way back in our motor cerebellum, basically right down in the deep motor patterns of our brain. So they're always there, and every human has them, and we can tap into them again. But yeah, we kind of, it's like our reflexive movement. So a moro reflex when a baby is born, when they throw their arms back, we have it for a certain purpose for a certain amount of time, and then it gets stored somewhere in that system for memory later on in case we need it. Same with the infant development patterns. So I want to see them breathing. Face down is prone. I want to see them breathing face up as well when they're a very newborn infant. At the age of somewhere between 2 and 3 months, I want to see them starting to roll to the side or move towards the side. So we see lateral breathing through the obliques and the ribs at the side of the body as well. So that's the most important thing for an infant. And making an infant and a baby feel, and a child and a human, feel completely safe and secure. So one of the things that is a roadblock in that particular stage is that baby feeling safe and secure? Is that baby being picked up or tended to when it cries? And there's positive and negatives for what we call controlled crying, and it goes through everything with infant development. Children goes through stages of what's trendy and what's not trendy. And at the moment, I think it's not trendy to do controlled crying, even though I did it with my children. A baby needs to know that its cries are going to be heard and tended to. And so making sure that the baby is safe so that it can breathe, basically praying supine. And then from then we go to side rolling. And then we go to toes in mouth, I think is next after that. So rolling to the side, starting to learn that you've got a left and the right side of the body, because as Czech practitioners, we know that the left side of the body is female and the right side of the body is male. So getting that patterning so that the baby starts to get aware of those sides of the body, even though it's much later on that we actually differentiate ourselves as male and female. But the patterning for that starts to happen as we evolve and develop. So side to side rolling, then I want to see full rolling over, but I want to see head control. I want to see around the same time, I want to see cervical spine extension. So being able to lift the head up, being able to then push off the arms. There's so many there's so many intricate little steps along the way. And with the Czech program, we learn the big steps. But then I've done dynamic neuromuscular stabilization is where I've started to learn those smaller, more intricate parts of that, because I found with my practice that people were I was able to get them to certain stages and then kind of they would stop. And I was like, well, what's the bits missing in the middle? Because I know there's bits of this infant development that I'm not quite understanding. So I went and did DNS, which has helped break it down into those smaller parts. But so I want to see breathing. I want to see rolling. I want to see pushing. So pushing and holding your head up, being able to move the head. Then we develop into pushing up onto our hands and knees, crawling, lunging, squatting, pulling up, being able to pull up, being able to cruise around furniture. So side stepping, which is a side lunge. Being able to effectively fall back down to the start position and redo all of that again, and then eventually gait pattern, so walking. Amazing.
Isn't it true that like an infant child is really such an athlete, and all the parents around are standing around going, oh, so cute, oh, so amazing, but it's like, oh, such hard work, they're just relentlessly trying these things that to us, like, because the baby's so cute, it seems easy, but it's not. It's so hard. Like,
it's hard work. Yeah. And when I have parents come in with infants and like they hear the infant, like their child crying and they want to go to their child and stop them from crying, there's a certain point where you have to go, okay, is that crying because they're in pain? And oftentimes parents will misunderstand that crying is for pain. And then so for putting babies on their belly for tummy time, I had a child who didn't like doing it. Babies don't love being on their face, but because of that, she was picked up and put on her back again. So I got her when she was 14 months old, and I knew exactly the reason why. And as soon as I got her down onto the floor and put her in a safe space and we taught her that it was safe and it was okay to be on her belly, then the patterns that she actually came in for started to progress, and it was because we had to take her back. But so I can't remember what the question was there now. I've gone on a sidetrack.
No, the question was basically, can you, enlighten us as to these stages of infant development? And as you say, the Czech system sort of teaches the real big gates of that development, and then DNS comes in and fills the gaps, because I guess that's where Paul learnt the infant development stuff from. So you're kind of going to the source there, and so there's this spectrum of development. There's lots of minute details in between. What are some of the roadblocks that commonly occur, and maybe myths that are in that space that parents think they're doing the right thing, but they're actually inhibiting one of these phases?
Yeah. So one I've just brought up, thinking that knowing or saying that your baby doesn't like tummy time. No baby likes tummy time, because they have to learn how to lift their head up, and the head weighs 8 times more than the rest of the body at that stage. So you imagine trying to pick up a weight that weighs 8 kilos when you weigh barely any kilos, kind of thing. It's hard on the neck to be able to do that.
That's fair enough.
They have to learn how to do it.
Sure.
So they have to learn how to do it in a prone position. They have to learn how to do it in upright position, so holding them up on your chest and letting them move that head off your chest, lifting it up and letting them fall back down as much as you can without breaking their nose on your collarbone, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. Parental interference is a massive roadblock for infant development. Parent interference. And that's, I don't want people to think that they are doing the wrong thing. They're doing what they know. And a lot of my coaching of infants and children is that I coach the parents as well and give them the confidence to go, it's okay to let your baby cry for this moment in time because they need to learn, and that weight is really heavy. If you went over and picked up a weight, you're going to be sore tomorrow. So they're getting sore in that small space of time. So maybe less than the time that they're in that position, but don't avoid doing that position altogether if you know that it's one of the patterns that they need. That's one. Not being given enough time and space on their own to be able to develop. So one of, like I said, I mentioned my cousin who had hip dysplasia. He was particularly aggressive with his younger sister when she was born. And I remember this, he would sit on her when she started to crawl because he knew he was a little bit older and he knew that she was a threat to him and to his toys and to his attachment to his parents. So he would sit on her and she would scream and cry. And then obviously my auntie would come in and tell him off and get him off. But so that not being given enough space and time within a family to have and hold space for yourself to be able to learn those movements. So having siblings is a great thing, but also it can be a detrimental thing to an infant when they're learning how to evolve as well. So knowing that as a parent that you need to have one-on-one time with each of your children, or try to if you can, knowing that that child needs one-on-one time on the floor in a safe space where it knows it can start to practice those things without a sibling coming and sitting on top of you, or an animal coming and sitting on top of you, or not being given the space to fall and learn that hurts, that was the wrong way to do it, I need to do it a different way, or learn that I've got to fall and I've got to keep getting up and doing it. So giving them space to do that. And then the next biggest thing would probably be the surfaces that people have babies on. So babies, the nervous system is responsive. So if crawling on a hard surface, or if you're crawling on rocks, is going to hurt your knees, and it only has to happen once for the nervous system to remember it. So a baby will go, ouch, that hurt, I'm not going to do that again. So giving them the opportunity to move in spaces that aren't harmful to the nervous system. So having softer mats. And when First Nations people have infants and when they're learning how to crawl, they actually used to take them down beside the river, supervised, but take them down beside the river because that's where the moss grew on the ground. So it's a little bit softer for them to be able to learn how to crawl in those spaces. So thinking about it in terms of getting yourself down on the floor and crawling around and going, oh, that actually does hurt. So if it hurts you, it's going to hurt their knees as well. And not putting padding on their knees, but just giving them a softer surface that they can practice on. Giving them something that's grippy. I had a client who was showing me her niece the other day, and they had her on timber floors, and I said to her, just give her something to crawl on that's just a bit more grippy until she gets it, and then take her back to the floors that are a little bit harder so that because she needs both of the surfaces to learn on, but make it a little bit easier for her to start with. And then the next biggest one is putting kids in shoes. I don't like putting kids in shoes. Anything that restricts them from movement, particularly their feet, particularly when they're walking, because the feedback we get from the nerves on the bottom of our foot is important to tell the brain where to place that foot down, how soft or how hard to put that foot down. Is it safe? And when you put a barrier between the foot and the ground, we desensitize. Like adults, we desensitize ourselves. So, don't put your kids in shoes, or don't put them in shoes until it's absolutely necessary. And when you do, put them in shoes that are protective but soft, so it still allows the foot to be able to move in the pattern that it should move. And that's a whole nother another hour talk about the pattern of the foot and everything, so I won't go into that. And then the next thing, probably the biggest thing, is putting kids into devices that make them move before the body is ready to move. So walkers and jolly jumpers is the bane of my existence. Whenever someone puts up a jolly jumper, I have to hold and bite my tongue really hard about sprouting and like getting very upset about it, because it's one of the things that I was put in that probably didn't help my development in my hips.
Gotcha.
A child will stand up when their body's ready, when the muscles are ready, when the joints are ready, when the ligamentous system around those joints is ready to hold them. When you put them in a position that they're not developmentally ready for, they might look like they're able to do it, but you don't know how much damage you're doing, and it often doesn't reflect until much later, until they start to learn how to jump and run, till they're 2 and 3 years old, that their joints have been put under unnecessary strain too early. And then the last thing is sitting in seats. So when kids get sent to school and get told to sit in a chair, that is a massive regression in human infant development.
Wow, there's a lot in all of those points. So I recommend everyone does a little rewind there and picks them out again. But I wasn't writing them down, but the ones at the top of my head to go back through would be, the parental interference in certain things. And I think that's a good point you mentioned in that was, we're not trying to guilt trip parents here or say that everyone's doing things wrong, where parents are just doing what they know. This stuff's extremely complicated. It's come from billions of years of evolution of, the organism that we have today. And now we're kind of, as a culture, having to reverse engineer this process and like troubleshoot the little areas. So, this is...
Maya Angelou has a fantastic quote that says, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And, I'm sure anyone who is listening to all of that is going to reflect on, I wonder what happened at my age, or what was going on for me, or what did my parents do, and this sort of stuff. But this is the beauty of this work, is that even as adults, you can go to someone like a Czech practitioner, assess these areas and get, get massive gains in improvements in areas of, your feeling in your body and your mind and emotions.
It's never too late.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Life Rocks is not just a podcast. It is an education foundation centered around connecting children to the magic of nature through earth sciences. As a self-funded foundation and startup, we are constantly seeking support so that we can continue our great work. So if you feel called to donate to Life Rocks, please head down to the show notes and find the relevant donation link. We accept regular money as well as cryptocurrencies. We greatly appreciate you, our Life Rocks community. Now, back to the show.
So, now you're a grandmother. You've raised a family, and you're seeing your children have come into adults, having their own generations emerging. What is the core of the wisdom that you're looking to express to this new generation of children?
It's really hard. I think when you raise your own children, you're so in it and in the... You said I'm allowed to swear?
Absolutely, yeah.
You're so in the shit show of it that you miss stuff. And having grandchildren amplifies the good things you did with your children and the not so good things you did with your children. And my core wisdom that I would like to pass on to them would be love them and let them be who they are meant to be, and let them explore that. Don't try and mold them into something that you think they should be, or as a reflection of who you are as a parent. Because as a grandparent, you learn that, kids will eventually become who they are meant to be, but how much you try and drive that and try and direct that will determine how long it takes them to get there. So, and enjoy the process, all of the process, because like it is a shit show for most of the time. And when you're in it, it feels like it's never going to end. And then you suddenly turn around and you've got grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah, well. So, distilling that down maybe a step further, what is the advice that grandmother Tanya would give mother Tanya?
Chill out.
Chill out.
Chill out. And I know people said this to me along the way that it'll go really quickly. It goes really quickly. So get a meditation practice, whatever that meditation practice is, and learn to be able to be still in the moment, because in the world that we live in, we are often forced into timeframes that don't allow us to stop and be still. And one of the things that I regret is probably not noticing the things that I notice now in my grandchildren, in my own children. I missed some, like, not that I knew about infant development at the time, I didn't, but the way they learn, the way they ask questions, and the stages between about when they start being able to verbalize properly, 2.5 and 3.5, when they ask why, that used to drive me nuts. Whereas now when the grandchildren are doing it, I take the time to understand that they're trying to learn and see it from their perspective more.
Yeah.
So I would say to myself, yeah, your children are I think I used to take it personally. If my kids misbehaved as well, I would think that people would think I'm a bad parent because of that. Let go of what everybody else thinks. Let go of what you think they think of you, because most of the time they're just thinking about what themselves and what they think other people thinking of them, kind of thing. It's like that magnifying glass. Like when you're in it, you think that everybody is looking at you when they're not. They're actually just looking at their own stuff and worrying that other people are looking at them. So let go of what other people think of your parenting skills and just do the best that you can in the moment. And that changes all the time, and it changes from moment to moment with children, but it changes from child to child to child as well. After having 6 of them, Andrew and I are still throwing our hands up in the air and going, we thought we'd done this shit before. Like, really? She's throwing this at us? Like, where did this come from? Like, we thought we'd gone through the gamut of everything a child could do.
Yeah.
And then they bring up something else. So, yeah, sit with knowing that your children are your best teachers.
Wow, cool. So I guess that's the wisdom that comes with the mantle of being a grandmother, that you can't skip stages. You've just got to go through it. But you can listen to people like you and share that wisdom back. So I think that's very valuable for parents.
Yeah.
So for a mother who has been through lots of childbirth, there can be a lot of work in recovery and repair and rejuvenation after childbirth. And coming from a physical therapist perspective, what is your best advice for mothers in that department, and what have you learned there? Give us a little summary.
Don't be in a hurry to get back to the person you were before you had the child, or the body you were before you had the child, because the wisdom that comes with birthing children is a gift. And the way your body changes and the way you change as a person isn't something that men go through the same way. It isn't something that all women are able to go through. It really is like a gift that should be cherished. So don't be in a hurry to think you've got to meet somebody else's expectations, because your body has gone through a massive change, and also that spiritual level of changing and not letting go of who you were, but bringing forth the new archetype of the mother, and nurturing the things about you that you were before a mother, because they're still there. And knowing that both of those things can exist, and when we talk about archetypes, we're talking about different parts of our personality for those people who don't understand what that is. But the mother and like being a teacher or being a daughter or being a sister, all of those things still exist after you take on the role as mother and birth a child. But all of those things need to be nurtured and brought back together, so the body will reflect that transition and that integration of those things. So, yeah, take time. And again, First Nations people, they have this unspoken rule that you don't have another child for 3 years after you've given birth to a child. And a male who impregnates and a female again before that time is actually really frowned upon and sometimes excommunicated from that tribe, because it's really taboo to even think about doing that to a woman, because they've gone through so much, and they know that the body takes minimum 3 years and the physical spirit takes 3 years to be ready to do that again.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So I guess
it's a lot to sit with.
Yeah, there's a lot. This is rich. This is rich. I'm loving it. So, as a person who has all of this knowledge and awareness of how we form, how we grow, what it's like to be a whole being, at what stage did you begin your family, and how did that correlate with your desire to attain this knowledge or practice this knowledge? Were you aware of it? You said that you didn't have children when you were aware of infant development. Was that with all of your children, or how did that process?
No. So I had my first child, Kelvin, was born when I was 23.
Yeah.
And my second child, Timothy, was born when I was just 20. I just turned 25. So that was with my first husband. And he passed away 18 years ago now. So I've got 6 children, but 3 I gave birth to and 3 were my stepchildren. So then I met Andrew after my first husband had died. So Andrew's my second husband, and he already had 3 children as well. So we were this blended family. And then we had Eden before we got married as well. So Eden is the youngest, Kelvin's the oldest. So Kelvin's 25, Eden is 11. So there's exactly 11 years between Kelvin and Eden. Yeah. And there's exactly 11 years between Eden and our first grandchild as well, which is interesting. And 11 was my birthday, or is my birthday. So when the boys were born, I was 23 and I'd gotten married when I was 21, and I was so young and so naive and so much still a child evolving myself when I look back on it now. I'm so thankful I had the boys when I did, because it's given me the perspective of having children when I was young and children when I was, I wouldn't say old, but I was 35, I think, when I had Eden.
More mature.
34. Yeah, more mature. So, yeah, I didn't have the knowledge that I have now about movement pattern and life when I had the boys. It was, you got married, or this is my example, I got married and the next obvious thing was to have children. And I wanted to have children when I was younger. I was always good with babies and things like that. So I think it was probably just expected that that's what I would do. Yep. Not that I wouldn't have a career, but I was not great at school and I was not great at sport. So it was not a thing that I would go to university even, because it just wasn't, not that it wasn't offered, or I was one of only, like, of our group of girlfriends, I think I was maybe only one of 2 of us who didn't go to uni. But it just wasn't, I didn't think I would be able to do it. So I didn't even contemplate the thought of that. So having children and working was, I guess, just the next practical thing, or the next thing that I thought I would do.
Sure.
Brian passed away when Timothy was just 5 years old. So then I met Andrew the year later, and then had Eden. So after Brian had passed away, that's when I became a personal trainer and found the CHECK program, found that within the first 3 months of starting to think that I was going to do personal training, and knew that that's what I wanted to do, because I was really interested in working from the holistic perspective of medicine. Yeah. So rather than coming from what I had gone through with my husband who died of cancer, spent 4 years in that medical model of trying to cure something rather than preventative. So after he passed away, I knew that I wanted to do something in that realm, but didn't quite know what. And then a friend said to me, you'd make a great personal trainer, because I was into movement at that stage. I was going to the gym and had started to enjoy movement then. Yeah, so became a personal trainer, met Andrew, and then had done some of this study within that realm when Eden was born. So she benefited from my knowledge after she was born. But I think more so the grandchildren have because of that continuation of study.
Lucky them.
Yeah. And the older kids are benefiting from it too now as well. Like, I shouldn't say that they didn't benefit from it, because Andrew's a chiropractor and they, believe it or not, they listen to him more than they listen to me. So they've done some training with me and corrective movement, but they see Andrew more, I think, as that role model for movement and health.
Okay. Yeah, I guess any amount of knowledge or wisdom that any family member takes on, it doesn't travel far from the tree and will nourish the roots of everyone and everything around it at some stage. And
at some stage, that's a good point, because they certainly didn't listen to me when they were teenagers.
No, I think it takes until the 20s before the teenage shakes off the shackles of its own, bias, to discover that, hey, mum was actually doing the best she could and she's a bloody legend, and I should be more appreciative. And I think we've all been through that. Well, you and I have, at least, probably.
And also when, definitely. And more so when they have their own children,
another round of it again, probably. Oh, wow. Like such gratitude and a bit more humble.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to actually ask you about your roller skating and your surfing a bit more, because that's pretty cool things for a mum to be into. There's many mums out there who are in the helicopter mum category or the helicopter dad category, where they're maybe risk averse people themselves. They're not sporty. They don't like the outdoors. So when they see their child naturally trying to climb a tree or jump a creek bed or jump on a little motorbike or whatever it is, their anxiety and fear is high, which then can impact how a child thinks about risk and can feel comfortable moving through space in any environment. And then that will inhibit, that child's ability to take risks in life and to feel safe in environments or to use their body. So what's your best advice to parents for overcoming that fearfulness, letting go, maybe?
Part of being a parent, and particularly as children get older and have their own children and go through complete life changes, being a parent is always going to be painful. How much of that pain you feel, or how much of that fear and anxiety you feel, will affect your child. So you need to let them learn from their own mistakes. You need to let them fall. Like when they're learning how to walk, they need to fall over because they need to learn how far it is to get back up, but what determination it takes to get back up again. And it is bloody scary seeing your kid fall or climb a tree or ride a motorbike or walk to school by themselves or go and stay at a friend's place by themselves. And statistics say that it's a much safer place now than it was even when we were growing up in the 1970s and 1980s. And people who are helicopter parents, I often hear them say, that's because we've protected them and blah, 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 blah. It's actually not that. And when you look at the statistics properly, it's the same. I see that we are making children less trusting of themselves and their choices that they make by not giving them the opportunity to make mistakes. And it is bloody scary to think that you want to let your kid cross the road, or not that you want to, that you need to let your kid cross the road in order to experience crossing the road at the wrong time, because there's a big risk involved in that. But I think that life comes with risks, and we can't ever take away those risk factors. We can minimize them. You're not going to give a baby a knife because it's going to put it in its mouth. But educated and let go of, it's really hard to say, let go of the fear of losing them. Because if you go into life or go into having children fearing losing them, that's always going to hang over your head, and that's going to affect the parenting that you do. You take a risk when you have a child and bring a human into the world that you will lose them or that they will lose you. And for me, after having lost my husband and knowing that grief and seeing my children lose their father, I would go through that 100 times over for the risk of having the love that comes with it. Like if I had said I didn't want to have children because the thought of them losing their father, like it's awful. And like I wouldn't want children to go through that, but the fact that they're here, but also the fact that he got to experience having children, like that's, I wouldn't rob somebody of that experience kind of thing. So the risk of something going wrong or losing a child, I think is a risk that I would take every day over, not like, yeah, does that make sense? Like not of the love that you get back or the experience that you get from living a full life within that.
Totally. Yeah, if we shelter people from all of the different experiences of life, then they're never really going to get to live, and that's not what we want.
No, and I think they're more at risk of experiencing things that are not so great in life, the less that you give them the experience to do that and to fail and to hurt themselves. Like the more you protect them, I think the bigger and the harder the fall is when they do have something happen. Like, yeah, I think they need to have those experiences so that they learn to trust their own judgment, because you're not going to be here forever to be making those calls.
Totally. Learning how to fall. Yeah. If you've only fallen once in your life, you're probably going to be terrible at it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mum's not always there to catch you.
No, not at all.
What is the most important things for all families to remember in this day and age?
That everybody's individual, everybody's different, and everybody learns differently. So you can have a family that's living in the same house with the same parenting, experiencing completely different realities to each other within that household. So as parents, we need to acknowledge that not all of our parenting skills will work with all of those children or the children that you've got in the house, that it needs to evolve, it needs to ebb and flow, and that as individuals and families within that we give each other space to learn and grow and to evolve with our own personalities, but always coming back to love in the middle.
Great advice. It reminds me of a poem by Khalil Gibran, which is going to be drastically paraphrased and butchered right here. And it is that children come through you and are their own unique soul expression. So parents are the channel through which very strange and unique beings can come through. And sometimes in parenting, I'm sure you have to remind yourself of that.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. Yep. And don't blame it on your partner.
Great advice. Yeah. So, Tanya, do you have a wish for the future generations of this beautiful planet Earth?
Yeah, that they listen to the elders, not of our generation, but of past elders, and look after the planet. Otherwise, there's not going to be a planet to live on. And I didn't, like, when that was said to us in the 80s, that I don't think it was called climate change then, it was called something different. But looking after the environment was certainly something that I learned about in school. But I think now I can see how we haven't done that and how we need to change that now. Otherwise, there won't be a planet to live on, and we can't survive anywhere else.
Can't go to Mars?
I don't think I would like to experiment with that. I'm sure there are people who would, but no.
Not up for eating the algae grown by Elon Musk and.
I have enough trouble eating things that we've grown up with now, let alone, and that's a really good point, how that's evolved. Like, I don't think I'd want to experiment with anything other than what we already know now and go back to the basics of what we knew worked in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a lot about what this podcast is about, is bringing back ancient wisdom, bringing back the connection to nature, which has been our evolutionary home, which was our evolutionary birthplace. It is our mother in the biggest sense. So your work is so in alignment with all of that. I've been really honored having this conversation, and it's been very rewarding, and I hope we can have more conversations like this, because
absolutely, we didn't even touch on the surfing and the roller skating really, so we need to come back to that at some point.
We absolutely do. And I think just before we go, we should take a little quick dip there, which is to say that I think it's cool to have a mum that roller skates, surfs, and goes in body sculpting competitions. Is that the opinion of your children as well?
Probably not in the moment at the time, but certainly, as they've gotten older, they've come back and said, how did you even do that? And not that I did it thinking that it would encourage them or anything, but I know I've shown courage by doing it. And I think that has been probably their biggest take home from it. And the thing that I have learnt by doing those things, that I've shown courage and bravery. And that's what I really want my children to be like. Amazing. Yeah. It's not the personal end result so much as it's the energy that emanates from someone who's out there doing things like that. And that's role model behavior. So really well done on that. It's always the journey. It's never the end point. Cool. Yeah, really good. And we will dive into what it's like to compete as a mum in those various things next time. Tanya, what's the name of your podcast if people want to go and check out your surf coaching, surfing podcast? Sure. It's Amongst the Waves. Great. Yeah, awesome. So you can find me there, or you can find me all over social media. Just Google my name. Great. And then Live Strong Primal Fitness, Melbourne. If you're in Melbourne and you're at all interested in anything we've been talking about / your personal health and development, I would go and say good day to Tanya. And Intrgrated Chiropractic is where we're at right now. So, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Anything else you wish to share before we wrap it up? Excellent. No, all good. That's what we like. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Tanya. And thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks to the Life Rocks audience. And we will see you next time with another informative, amazing podcast with an amazing guest. Ciao for now.
Thank you so much for listening to the Life Rocks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more inspiring content, and in the meantime, remember, life rocks.